Lonely rancher bought a starving girl at auction, then learned she was his sister's child. He paid $23 for what he thought was a servant. But the starving girl, tracing letters in the dirt, would shatter everything he believed about his past. The auction yard breathed with the desperation of broken dreams and empty bellies. Thomas Brennan clutches his last $23, searching for something, anything, to fill the silence that has consumed his ranch. Among the human cargo stands a frail girl whose hollow eyes hold secrets deeper than the prairie wells. Her fingers move constantly in the dirt, writing invisible words that seem to call to him across the dusty space. When the bidding begins, Thomas finds his hand rising not from loneliness, but from something darker, a pull he cannot name, toward a child whose very presence whispers of ghosts he thought he'd buried. The sun hung like a brass coin over Millerville, casting shadows that stretched longer than the promises men made in saloons. Thomas Brennan stood at the edge of the auction yard, $23 folded tight in his vest pocket. Every cent he had left after the drought took his cattle, and the bank took his hope. The smell hit him first. Unwashed bodies, fierce sweat, and the metallic tang of desperation. People clustered in the center of the yard like cattle themselves, waiting to be sold into contracts that might as well have been chains. Some stood proud, chins high despite their circumstances. Others crumpled inward, already broken by whatever series of failures had brought them here. Thomas pulled his hat low and moved closer. He hadn't come here planning to buy a person. The very idea sat wrong in his gut, like spoiled meat. But the silence at Broken Creek Ranch had grown so thick he could taste it in his morning coffee, feel it crawling under his skin during the long nights when coyotes sang and he had no one to answer. The auctioneer, a round man with a voice like thunder, climbed onto a wooden crate. His hammer caught the light as he raised it high. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have fine workers today. Strong backs, willing hands, honest folk down on their luck and ready to earn their keep." The crowd pressed forward. Ranchers, merchants, housewives looking for help with their endless chores. Thomas found himself pushed toward the front, close enough to see the whites of frightened eyes. Then he saw her. She couldn't have been more than 12, maybe 13. A slip of a thing with bones showing through her faded dress like fence posts through winter snow. Her hair hung in tangles the color of old rope, but it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They weren't begging like the others. They watched everything with a strange stillness, as if she'd already seen too much of the world and found it wanting. Her fingers moved constantly in the dirt at her feet. Thomas squinted, trying to make sense of the motion. She was writing something, letters, maybe words. Over and over, the same pattern traced in the dust, then erased by her bare foot, then traced again. "Lot number 7, the auctioneer boomed. "Young Lucy here, age 13, can cook, clean, and mind children. Been working since she could walk. No sass, no complaints. Started at $5. The girl, Lucy, didn't flinch at the words. She kept writing in the dirt, her lips moving silently, as if speaking to ghosts only she could see. $6, called a woman in a blue bonnet. $7, shouted a man with tobacco stains on his beard. Thomas felt something twist in his chest. The way Lucy held herself reminded him of someone, a memory just out of reach, like trying to grab smoke. Her small hands, the tilt of her head when she concentrated on her invisible letters. $10. The tobacco-stained man was determined. The bidding slowed. $10 was serious money for a girl, so thin the wind might blow her away. Thomas watched her trace another word in the dust. This time he caught it. 3 letters, drawn carefully. M8-, a woman's voice cut through his thoughts. 11. The girl's head snapped up at the sound. Thomas saw something flicker across her face. Fear, maybe recognition. The woman bidding wore a dress that had seen better decades and a smile that promised nothing good. 12. The tobacco man wasn't giving up. Lucy's fingers worked faster now, more desperate. Thomas caught another letter, then A, then something that might have been M again. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. $13. The woman's voice had an edge now, sharp as broken glass. Lucy looked directly at Thomas then, her eyes locking onto his across the dusty space. For a moment, the noise of the auction faded to nothing. There was something in her gaze, not a plea, exactly, but a question, as if she recognized something in his face that even he didn't know was. His hand went up before he realized he'd moved. $15. The words came out rougher than he'd intended. Heads turned toward him, the quiet man in the worn hat who'd been standing silent until now. The tobacco-stained, bitter, cursed under his breath. 16, the woman called, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. Thomas thought of his empty ranch, his cold meals eaten in silence, the way he talked to his horse because there was no one else to hear his voice. He thought of the girl's fingers writing invisible words, the familiar way she held her head. $20. The auction yard went quiet. $20 was 2 months' wages for some folks. The woman in the faded dress shook her head and stepped back. The tobacco man spat in the dirt and walked away. $20 going once. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the sudden silence. Going twice. Lucy stared at Thomas with those 2 old eyes. Her lips formed a single word, silent but clear. Please. Sold to the gentleman in the black hat. The gavel fell like a gunshot. Thomas felt the weight of it in his bones, the finality of what he'd just done. Around him, people moved on to the next lot, but he stood frozen, watching as Lucy was led toward him by one of the auctioneer's men. She walked with her head down, hands clasped in front of her like she was heading to her own funeral. When she reached him, she stopped just out of arm's reach and looked up. "Mister," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I ain't much for heavy work, but I won't cause trouble." Thomas pulled the $23 from his pocket, everything he had in the world. His hand shook as he counted out 20 and handed them to the auctioneer's man. The remaining $3 felt heavier than the 20 he'd just spent. "What's your full name, child?" he asked. "Lucy," she said, then paused. "Lucy Mae." The name hit him like a fist to the gut. Lucy Mae. His sister Sarah used to say that name in her letters, back when she still wrote to him. Back before their father's belt and their mother's silence drove Sarah away into a marriage that was supposed to save her. Lucy Mae, Sarah's little girl. But that was impossible. Sarah had moved east with her husband years ago. She'd written about the baby, about settling down in Missouri where the grass grew green and children could grow up safe. She wouldn't have, couldn't have. Thomas stared at the girl's face, really looked at her for the first time. The shape of her nose, the stubborn set of her jaw, even when she was trying to be meek. Sarah's features, worn down by hunger and hardship, but unmistakable once you knew what it looked like. His throat went dry as desert sand. "Come on then," he managed to say. "Let's get you home." Lucy Mae followed him to his wagon without a word. She climbed up beside him, small hands folding in her lap like broken birds. As they rode out of Millerville, she went back to tracing letters in the dust of the wagon bed. Thomas wanted to ask her about her mother, about how she'd ended up in that auction yard looking like death's own shadow. But the words stuck in his throat like burrs. Instead, he listened to the creak of wagon wheels and the distant cry of hawks circling overhead. The girl beside him hummed softly, a tune he recognized but couldn't place. Something Sarah used to sing when she thought no one was listening. Something their mother had hummed before the silence took her to. As Broken Creek Ranch came into view, the sagging fences, the empty pastures, the house that had forgotten the sound of laughter, Thomas felt the weight of what he'd done settling over him like storm clouds. He bought a servant and found family instead. He'd spent his last honest dollar and purchased his own salvation. He'd thought he was rescuing a stranger, but sitting beside him was the ghost of every mistake he'd ever made, wrapped in the bones of a starving child who might just be the only family he had left in the world. The wagon wheels turned, carrying them both toward a truth that would change everything, while Lucy Mae's fingers continued their patient work in the dust, writing letters that spelled out words Thomas wasn't ready to read, stories he wasn't prepared to hear, and a past that refused to stay buried no matter how deep he'd tried to dig its grave. What secrets had the road carved into this child's heart, and how long before the truth of her identity would force Thomas to face the brother he'd failed to be when Sarah needed him most. The 7 miles back to Broken Creek stretched like a journey through hell's waiting room. Thomas kept the horses at a steady walk, partly to spare their tired legs, mostly because he wasn't ready to face what came next. Beside him, Lucy Mae sat silent as carved stone, her thin frame swaying with each bump and pothole. The sun had begun its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky the color of old blood. Thomas stole glances at the girl from the corner of his eye. She'd stopped tracing letters in the dust, but her hands still moved restlessly in her lap, fingers spelling out invisible words against her patched skirt. "You hungry?" he asked when the silence grew too heavy to bear. Lucy Mae's head turned toward him, eyes wide with something that might have been surprise. "Sir, food. When's the last time you had a proper meal?" She considered this like he'd asked her to solve a riddle. "Yesterday morning, I think. Lady gave me half a biscuit outside the general store." Half a biscuit. Thomas felt his jaw clench. No wonder she looked like she might blow away in a strong wind. "We'll fix that," he said. "Got beans and cornbread at the house. Coffee, too, if you drink it." "I can make coffee," Lucy Mae said quickly, as if proving her worth. "Mama taught me how. Said the secret was to never let it boil hard, just barely bubble." The way she said "mama" made something twist in Thomas's chest. Soft and careful, like she was handling broken glass. They crested the low hill that revealed Broken Creek ranch spread out below them. It wasn't much to look at: a weathered house that needed paint, a barn with missing boards, fences that sagged like tired old men. The creek that gave the place its name had dried to a trickle during the drought, leaving behind cracked mud and the skeletons of dead cottonwoods. Lucy Mae studied it all without speaking, but Thomas caught her counting things with her eyes: windows, fence posts, the distance to the road. Planning escape routes, maybe, or just trying to understand the shape of her new prison. "It ain't much," Thomas said, "but it's quiet. Peaceful." "Quiet's good," she replied. "Noise usually means trouble coming." The wagon wheels crunched over the gravel drive. Thomas pulled up beside the front porch and set the brake. Lucy Mae climbed down before he could offer help, landing light as a cat. She stood looking up at the house like she was reading its history in the weathered boards and empty windows. "This where you live all by yourself?" she asked. "For 3 years now." Thomas tied off the reins and grabbed her small bundle of possessions from the wagon bed. It weighed less than a sack of flour. "Gets lonesome sometimes." Lucy Mae nodded like she understood loneliness better than most adults understood happiness. Inside, the house felt even emptier than usual. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon light, streaming through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned since Sarah had visited that last time. Lucy Mae moved through the front room like she was walking through a church, careful not to touch anything without permission. "Kitchen's through here," Thomas said, leading her past the cold fireplace and the table where he ate his solitary meals. The kitchen still held the ghost of better days: cast iron pots that had once fed ranch hands, a bread box that used to be full, chairs around a table meant for family. Lucy Mae took it all in with those 2 old eyes, then rolled up her sleeves without being asked. "Where do you keep the flour?" she said. "Pantry's there." Thomas pointed to a narrow door beside the stove. "But you don't need to." "I do need to." Her voice was quiet but firm. "That's why you bought me, ain't it? To cook and clean?" The words hit him like a slap. He bought her. Actually paid money for a human being, like she was livestock or a piece of farm equipment. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like a millstone. Lucy Mae had already found the flour, the salt, the tin of lard. Her hands moved with surprising skill, measuring without measuring, kneading without looking. Like she'd done this 1,000 times before. "Mama taught me to bake," she said, not looking up from the dough. Said bread was like prayer, had to be done with patience and hope, or it wouldn't rise proper. There was again, that way she talked about her mother, present tense mixed with past, like the woman was both dead and alive in her mind. Thomas busied himself building a fire in the stove, but he kept watching Lucy Mae's hands. The careful way she shaped the loaf, the gentle touch when she tested the dough's readiness. Familiar movements that stirred something deep in his memory. While the bread baked, she tackled the beans. Found the ham bone he'd been saving, added onions and a touch of molasses. The smell began to fill the kitchen, rich and warm and alive in a way the house hadn't been for years. "You want coffee with supper?" she asked, already reaching for the pot. "Sure." Thomas settled into his usual chair at the kitchen table, but it felt different now. Less like a lonely man's perch and more like it used to feel when Sarah visited, when the house remembered what it was like to be a home. Lucy Mae hummed while she worked, a low, soft tune that made the hair on Thomas's arm stand up. He knew that melody. Sarah used to sing it while she helped their mother with the washing, back before everything went wrong. Back when they were still a family instead of scattered fragments trying to forget they'd ever belonged to each other. The coffee pot bubbled on the stove, never quite reaching a boil, just like Sarah used to make it. Lucy Mae poured him a cup, setting it down with the same careful precision he remembered from childhood. 2 hands on the handle, placed just so beside his right elbow. The cup was Sarah's old pattern, blue flowers on white ceramic. One of the few things Thomas had saved from their mother's house. He reached for the coffee, but his hand trembled and the cup slipped from his fingers. The crash echoed through the kitchen like breaking bones. Coffee and ceramic fragments scattered across the floor in a pattern that looked almost like the letters Lucy Mae had been tracing in the dirt. "Oh!" Lucy Mae dropped to her knees immediately, gathering the pieces with quick, efficient movements. "I'm sorry, mister. I'll clean it up, I promise. Don't be angry." The fear in her voice cut deeper than the broken cup. Thomas knelt beside her, careful not to startle her further. "I'm not angry," he said softly. "It was my fault for being clumsy." She looked up at him, ceramic shards cupped in her small palms like broken promises. "Mama always said accidents happen. Said getting mad about spilled milk won't put it back in the pitcher." Thomas felt something crack inside his chest, not breaking exactly but shifting, like ice beginning to thaw after a long winter. "Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman," he said. Lucy Mae's eyes filled with something that might have been tears. She was. Till the sickness took her. They cleaned up the broken cup together, working in a silence that felt different from the emptiness Thomas was used to. This was the silence of shared tasks, of 2 people learning to exist in the same space without crowding each other. The bread finished baking as the sun touched the horizon. Lucy Mae pulled it from the oven, golden brown and perfect, filling the kitchen with warmth that had nothing to do with the stove's heat. She cut thick slices and served the beans alongside, setting Thomas's plate down with the same careful attention she'd given the coffee. He took a bite and nearly choked. Not from the food. It was the best meal he'd tasted in months, but from the way it reminded him of Sunday dinners at his mother's table, when Sarah would sneak extra butter onto his bread and their father hadn't yet learned to use his fists for conversation. Lucy Mae ate like someone who'd forgotten that food might be available tomorrow. Small bites, careful chewing, nothing wasted. She finished half her portion and started to push the plate away. "Eat the rest," Thomas said. "I'm full." "No, you're not. You're scared there won't be enough." "But there is. Eat." She picked up her fork again, slower this time. With each bite, some of the hollow look around her eyes began to soften. After supper, she washed the dishes without being asked. Thomas sat in a chair, watching her move around his kitchen like she belonged there. The humming started again, that same tune that made his heart race for reasons he couldn't name. When she finished, Lucy Mae stood by the sink, hands folded, waiting for instructions like a soldier awaiting orders. "There's a room upstairs," Thomas said. Used to be a guest room. You can sleep there." She nodded and started toward the stairs, then paused. "Mister? What should I call you?" "Thomas. Just Thomas." "Thank you, Thomas. For the food. For buying me instead of her." She was halfway up the stairs before he found his voice again. "Lucy Mae." She turned, one small hand on the banister. "That song you were humming. Where'd you learn it?" Something flickered across her face. Memory, maybe pain. "Mama used to sing it." Said her brother taught it to her when they were little. Said it was about finding your way home when you were lost. The words hit Thomas like stones thrown at glass. Sarah's brother. The brother who'd run away when things got bad, who'd left his sister to face their father's rage alone. The brother who'd been too proud to answer her letters, too ashamed to attend her wedding, too much of a coward to help when she needed him most. Lucy Mae disappeared up the stairs, her footsteps light as whispers on the old wood. Thomas sat alone in his kitchen, surrounded by the lingering warmth of bread and the echo of his sister's lullaby, finally understanding the true weight of what $23 could buy. How long could a man carry guilt before it crushed him? And what happened when the past refused to stay buried? Especially when it came wearing the face of an innocent child who had no idea she was living among the ghosts of family she'd never known she had. 3 days passed like a careful dance between strangers learning each other's rhythms. Lucy Mae rose before dawn, moving through the house like a whisper made flesh. She cooked, cleaned, and mended without being asked, but always with the careful politeness of someone who knew how quickly kindness could turn cruel. Thomas found himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way she saved every scrap of food, storing crusts and bones like a squirrel preparing for winter. How she startled at sudden sounds, the creak of a floorboard, the slam of a door in the wind. Small things that told stories he didn't want to imagine. On the third evening, while Lucy Mae swept the front porch, Thomas climbed to the guest room to bring down fresh blankets. The door stood slightly ajar, revealing the small bundle of possessions she'd brought from the auction. A spare dress, worn thin as paper, a wooden comb with missing teeth, and something else, a dark shape wrapped in faded cloth. He shouldn't have looked, should have respected her privacy and walked away. But something about the careful way she'd hidden it, tucked beneath her spare dress like a treasure, made his hands move without permission. The cloth fell away to reveal a leather-bound Bible, small enough to fit in a child's hands. The cover was worn smooth by countless fingers, the pages yellowed with age and handling. Thomas opened it without thinking, and the words on the first page stopped his heart cold. For my darling Lucy, may God keep you safe when Mama cannot. All my love forever, Mama Sarah. Christmas 1882. The Bible slipped from his nerveless fingers, hitting the floor with a sound like thunder. Sarah's handwriting. Sarah's careful script that he'd know anywhere, even after all these years. Even after he'd burned every letter she'd sent him, too ashamed to read her words about happiness and hope when his own life had turned to ash. Sarah's daughter. Lucy Mae was Sarah's daughter. Thomas dropped into the room's single chair, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. The math was simple enough. Sarah had married young, moved east with her husband. Lucy Mae was 13 now, which meant she'd been born around the time Sarah stopped writing. Around the time Thomas had convinced himself his sister was better off without him. But if Lucy Mae was here, starving and sold at auction like livestock, then what had happened to Sarah? Footsteps on the stairs. Light, careful steps that belonged to someone who'd learned not to make noise. Thomas scrambled to pick up the Bible, but it was too late. Lucy Mae appeared in the doorway, her face going white when she saw him holding her most precious possession. "I'm sorry," she whispered, backing toward the stairs. "I should have asked before bringing it inside." "I'll take it to the barn, Lucy Mae." Thomas's voice came out like gravel. "Come here." She froze like a deer hearing wolves. Her eyes darted toward the stairs, measuring distances, calculating whether she could run fast enough to escape whatever punishment was coming. "I'm not angry," Thomas said, though his voice shook. This Bible. Where did you get it?" Lucy Mae's chin lifted with a spark of defiance that reminded him so much of Sarah it nearly stopped his breath. "It was my mama's. Only thing I got left of her." "Your mama's name was Sarah?" The defiance crumbled. Lucy Mae's face went through a dozen emotions: confusion, fear, recognition, and something that might have been hope. "What do you know Mama's name?" Thomas opened the Bible to the inscription page and held it out to her. "Because she was my sister." The words hung in the air between them, like smoke from a dying fire. Lucy Mae stared at the open Bible, then at Thomas's face, then back at the Bible. Her lips moved silently, working through the implications. "Sister," she repeated, testing the word like it might bite her. "Mama had a brother. Thomas. She talked about him sometimes when she thought I wasn't listening. Said he was stubborn and proud, and—" Her voice trailed off. "And what? And that she loved him anyway. Even though he broke her heart." The truth hit Thomas like a physical blow. He sagged forward in the chair, head in his hands. All this time, 3 days of watching this girl move through his house, of noting her familiar gestures and the way she hummed Sarah's songs, and he'd been too much of a fool to see what was right in front of him. He bought his own niece. Actually paid money for Sarah's daughter like she was a piece of property. "Uncle Thomas." Lucy Mae's voice was small, uncertain. She'd stepped closer, close enough that he could see the hope and fear warring in her expression. "Is it really you?" Thomas looked up at her, at Sarah's nose, Sarah's stubborn jaw, Sarah's way of tilting her head when she was thinking hard about something. But Lucy Mae's eyes held pain that Sarah had never known at that age, shadows that no child should carry. "It's me," he said. "God help us both, it's me." Lucy Mae was quiet for a long moment, studying his face like she was memorizing it. "Mama said you lived out west somewhere. Said you raised horses and that you used to tell her stories about cowboys and Indians when she was little." "I did." The words felt like pulling nails from old wood. "Before everything went wrong." What went wrong? How could he explain it? How could he tell her about their father's belt, their mother's silence, the way the house had felt like a tomb even before anyone died? How could he describe the night he'd finally fought back, bloodied their father's nose, and walked away forever, leaving Sarah to face the consequences alone? "I left," he said simply. "When your mama needed me most, I ran away." Lucy Mae absorbed this with the gravity of someone who'd learned early that adults were capable of terrible failures. She walked to the window and looked out at the darkening sky. "Mama died last winter," she said. "Fever took her. Papa had already run off with some woman from town. Left us with nothing but debts and empty promises." Thomas felt each word like a hammer blow. Sarah was dead. Had been dead for months while he went about his business, ignorant and alone. While Lucy Mae faced hunger and abandonment and whatever series of disasters had led her to that auction block. "What happened after?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Neighbors took me in for a while. Fed me scraps and made me work for it. When winter got bad and their own kids were hungry, they said I had to go. Told me there was a place in Millerville where folks might want help." Lucy Mae's voice stayed steady, but her hand shook. "They didn't tell me it was the auction yard." Thomas closed his eyes, imagining it. His niece, Sarah's precious daughter, walking into that yard believing she was going to find honest work. Learning instead that she was the merchandise. "Lucy Mae," he said, Do you remember me at all? From when you were little?" She turned from the window, her face thoughtful. "Sometimes I dream about a tall man with kind eyes. He carried me on his shoulders and told me stories about magic horses that could outrun the wind. Mama said it was just my imagination, but it wasn't." Thomas stood, his legs still unsteady. "I visited once when you were about 4. Only stayed 2 days before your father made it clear I wasn't welcome." "You're real," Lucy Mae whispered. "The man in my dreams is real. I'm real. And I'm sorry." The words tore out of him like they'd been buried in his chest for years. "I'm sorry I left your mama. I'm sorry I wasn't there when she needed help. I'm sorry you ended up in that auction yard. I'm sorry for all of it." Lucy Mae studied his face with eyes that had seen too much, but somehow still held capacity for forgiveness. "Mama used to say sorry was just a word unless you meant to do different. I do mean to do different." Ow! The question hung between them like a challenge. Thomas looked around the empty house, at the life he'd built from loneliness and regret, at the niece he'd unknowingly rescued, who carried his sister's face and a pain that should never have been hers to bear. "I don't know yet," he said honestly, "but I'll figure it out." "We'll figure it out." Lucy Mae nodded slowly, then surprised him by stepping forward and placing her small hand on his arm. "Uncle Thomas? Can I keep calling you just Thomas?" "Uncle feels strange. Whatever feels right to you." She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, chasing away some of the shadows and revealing the child she might have been in a kinder world. "Thomas," she said, testing the name like a prayer. "Do you think Mama would be happy that we found each other?" Thomas thought about Sarah's last letter, the one he'd burned unread because he'd been too proud to face his sister's life going on without him. He thought about the inscription in the Bible, about how Sarah had trusted God to keep her daughter safe when she couldn't. Maybe this was how prayers got answered, not with angels and miracles, but with $23 and a moment of recognition in a dusty auction yard. As the first stars appeared over Broken Creek Ranch, uncle and niece stood in the gathering darkness, two broken pieces of the same family learning that sometimes the things we lose find their way back to us when we need them most. Changed, scarred, but still carrying the possibility of love. Dawn came soft over Broken Creek Ranch, painting the sky the color of fresh milk. Thomas had barely slept, his mind churning through 15 years of mistakes and the impossible gift of second chances. Downstairs, he could hear Lucy Mae moving through the kitchen with the quiet efficiency she'd already made her own. When he came down, she had coffee waiting and eggs scrambling in the pan. She looked up at him with eyes that held new knowledge, the weight of family found, and the careful hope of children who'd learned not to expect too much from adults. "Morning, Uncle Thomas," she said, testing the words like a key in an unfamiliar lock. The title hit him square in the chest. Uncle. A word he'd never thought he'd hear, wrapped in a voice that carried Sarah's musical inflection. "Morning, Lucy Mae." He settled into his chair, noting how she'd set his coffee cup in exactly the spot where the broken one had sat. A new cup, but placed with the same careful attention. "Sleep all right? Better than I have in months." She slid the eggs onto his plate alongside thick slices of yesterday's bread. "Uncle Thomas? Can I ask you something? Anything. Why didn't you ever come back?" After that visit when I was little, Thomas had known this question was coming, but it still landed like a blow. He stared into his coffee, watching steam rise like the ghosts of old regrets. "Your father made it clear I wasn't welcome. And I was angry. At him, at the world, at God. I thought your mama was better off without me dragging my troubles into her life." Lucy Mae sat down across from him, her own plate untouched. "Mama wasn't better off. She missed you something fierce. I know that now. She kept all your letters. Even after you stopped writing." The words hit him like stones. "I never sent any letters. Not after you left home, no. But from before when you were kids. She had a whole box of them. Little notes you used to slip under her door when Papa was drinking. Telling her it would be okay, that you'd protect her." Thomas felt his throat close up. He'd forgotten about those notes, written in a child's desperate script and passed to his sister like secret promises. Promises he'd ultimately broken when he ran away and left her to face their father alone. "She showed them to me sometimes," Lucy Mae continued, "when I was scared or sad. Said her brother Thomas had been brave enough to stand up to Papa, that maybe someday I'd be brave like that too. I wasn't brave. I was a coward." "No." Lucy Mae's voice carried a firmness that surprised him. "A coward wouldn't have bought me at that auction. A coward wouldn't have fed me and given me a safe place to sleep." They ate in silence after that, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the empty silence Thomas had grown accustomed to, but the comfortable pause of people learning to trust each other. After breakfast, Lucy Mae helped him with the morning chores. She had a way with animals that reminded him painfully of Sarah, who'd always been able to calm spooked horses with nothing but soft words and gentle hands. Lucy Mae talked to the chickens like they were old friends, gathered eggs with careful precision, and somehow convinced the ornery milk cow to cooperate without fuss. "You've done this before," Thomas observed. "Mama and I had animals. Before Papa left, and the bank took everything." Lucy Mae's voice stayed level, but her hands tightened on the milk pail. Had to sell them one by one just to eat. The cow went last, right before. She didn't finish, but Thomas could fill in the rest. Right before Sarah got sick. Right before his sister died alone, probably worrying about what would happen to her daughter. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like wet wool. That afternoon, Lucy Mae surprised him by asking to see the garden plot behind the house. It was nothing but weeds and hard-packed earth now. Thomas hadn't bothered with vegetables since he'd given up believing the future might be different from the past. "Could we plant something?" she asked, kneeling to run her fingers through the soil. Mama always said gardens were like prayers. You plant them in faith and tend them in hope. Thomas looked at the abandoned plot, at the girl kneeling in the dirt like she was blessing it. It's late in the season. Might not get much before frost. Something's better than nothing. Lucy Mae looked up at him with Sarah's determined expression. And there's always next year. Next year. The phrase hung between them like a promise neither of them was ready to speak out loud. They spent the rest of the day clearing weeds and breaking up the hard-pan soil. Lucy Mae worked with the focused intensity of someone who understood that idle hands led to hungry bellies. She seemed to know exactly where to plant what. Beans along the fence where they could climb, squash in the corners where they'd have room to spread, carrots in neat rows that would store well through winter. "How do you know all this?" Thomas asked, watching her guide his hands as they planted turnip seeds. "Mama taught me," said her brother used to help their mama in the garden when they were kids. Said he had a gift for making things grow. Another memory Thomas had buried. Afternoons spent beside his mother, learning that seeds needed patience and faith in equal measure. Sarah had worked beside them, her small hands always gentler than his, her voice full of questions about why plants knew to grow toward the sun. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, they planted the last row together. Lucy Mae's hands covered his as they pressed seeds into the earth, her touch so light he might have imagined it. "Uncle Thomas," she said as they gathered their tools. "When Mama died, she made me promise something." "What's that?" "To never give up looking for family." Said blood finds blood, even when it's lost. Lucy Mae wiped dirt from her hands on her apron. "Do you think she knew?" "Somehow that I'd find you." Thomas looked around the garden plot, raw earth marked with the promise of green things to come. At his niece, who carried his sister's face in a strength that humbled him. At the ranch that had felt like a tomb for 3 years and now hummed with the possibility of life. "I think your mama was smarter than both of us," he said, "and maybe God's got a sense of humor we don't understand." That evening, Lucy Mae cooked supper with ingredients from their shared labor. Beans they'd planted together, bread made with flour they'd measured side by side, coffee brewed with water from the well they'd both drawn from. It tasted different than any meal Thomas had eaten in years. It tasted like family. After the dishes were cleaned and put away, they sat on the front porch watching stars emerge in the vast prairie sky. Lucy Mae had brought her Bible, and she read aloud in Sarah's voice, psalms about green pastures and still waters, about valleys of shadow and the promise of dwelling in the house of the Lord forever. "Uncle Thomas," she said when she closed the Bible, "are you going to keep me?" The question hit him sideways. He'd been so focused on the miracle of finding her, on the guilt of how it happened, that he hadn't stopped to consider what came next. "This is your home now," he said. "If you want it to be, what if I mess up? What if I break things or eat too much, or Lucy Mae?" Thomas turned to look at her directly. "You're not a servant anymore. You're family. Family doesn't get thrown away for making mistakes." She studied his face in the starlight, looking for lies or false promises. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Can I plant flowers next spring?" she asked. "Mama loved flowers." Said they were God's way of showing us that beauty could grow anywhere, even in hard ground. Thomas thought about the garden plot they'd worked together, about seeds sleeping in dark earth waiting for their chance to reach toward light, about the way forgiveness could take root in the most unlikely soil. "We'll plant whatever you want," he said. "Flowers, vegetables, maybe even an apple tree." Lucy Mae smiled, not the careful, fearful expression she'd worn at the auction, but something real and bright and full of tomorrow. As the night deepened around them, uncle and niece sat together in the comfortable silence of family found. The Broken Creek ranch no longer felt broken. It felt like ground that had been waiting to be tended, like a story that had finally found its proper ending. In the months that followed, neighbors would remark on the change in Thomas Brennan. How his step had purpose again, how his eyes had lost that hollow look of a man with nothing left to lose. They'd see him and Lucy Mae working side by side in their growing garden, teaching each other the things that family shares: patience, hope, and the quiet knowledge that some broken things can be made whole again. But that night, sitting under stars that had watched over the prairie since before there were names for loneliness or redemption, they were simply two people who had found their way home to each other through the darkness. Proof that love can bloom in the hardest ground, and that sometimes the very thing that seems to destroy us carries within it the seeds of our salvation. The ranch would flourish again. The garden would feed them through the winter and bloom with flowers come spring. And in the kitchen, where Sarah's lullabies once again filled the air, uncle and niece would share meals that tasted of forgiveness, of family, and of the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. In the end, $23 had bought more than Thomas ever imagined. Not a servant, but salvation. Not solitude's end, but family's beginning. Not just another mouth to feed, but a heart that would teach his own to beat with purpose again.